Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? This is Chef Heather, and I'm here at our classroom, the Sweet and Savory Classroom. And are you ready to make some cookies this morning? I'm pretty excited, and this is going to be a fun morning for your whole family. I know we have all ages on this video this morning, so we have some little ones. Baking with their parents, and then we also have some adults. So welcome to class. I'm going to pray over our class this morning. If you want to join me, you can. So Lord, just thank you for this time. We've been so encouraged by these virtual classes and the amount of learning that's been able to happen with our students and our friends out there. And so just bless everyone this morning, help keep them healthy, and let us have a good time. In your name we pray, amen. So are you ready to go? I know some of you probably already have your ingredients pre-measured, and that's completely fine. If you don't, no worries. I'm going to go over that this morning. You know, we have all different skill levels, but all different, all different types of people and homes that we're working with. So we definitely make sure we try to show as much as we can. For those of you that picked up ingredients from me yesterday, all of your ingredients you see are already portioned. So grab a cup of coffee, just maybe listen in so that you know how to portion your ingredients for the future. So what you're going to need this morning is, if you're using a scale, then you're going to definitely need your scale. If you're using cup measure, you're going to need your cup measures out. And I'm not using any cup measures this morning, but the amounts are on there. So if you're using the cups, that is fine. And then you're also going to need, some teaspoons and tablespoons nearby throughout class. So first, we're going to start with the butter. The butter is 6 ounces. I went ahead and measured mine. So ours come in 1 pound blocks. So you can see it looks like a really big piece of butter, because it is. But for those of you at home, 6 ounces is 1.5 sticks of butter. I get lots of questions about the butter, salted or unsalted. I typically use all unsalted butter in my baking. Now, don't be alarmed. If salted butter is what you have, then that's what you're going to use. And we've had lots of people in our classes that are definitely using salted butter. What I'd like to ask you to do, if you're using the salted butter, you're going to reduce the salt, and you're only going to use 1/2 teaspoon of salt in the recipe. So go ahead and make a note of that now. If you're using salted butter, go ahead and reduce the salt in your recipe to 1/2 teaspoon. If you're using unsalted butter, you're going to go ahead and use the amount that's on the recipe, which is 3/4 of a teaspoon. Okay, so first go ahead and get your butter measured. If your butter just came out of the fridge, what I would suggest is go ahead, take a small paring knife or a butter knife, and go ahead and cut that into about tablespoon sizes. And then I'm going to talk about what we're going to be mixing in. If you have a KitchenAid mixer, you're going to be using the KitchenAid with your paddle attachment, okay? And if you're using a bowl, you're just going to be mixing this by hand with a spoon, no problem. This is a regular cookie dough. If you made cookie dough before and you've mixed it by hand, you'll be just fine. But I will say, if your butter is, straight from the fridge, then go ahead and cut it into smaller pieces and go ahead and place it in your bowl. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put my butter in my mixer. If you're using your KitchenAid mixer, I would suggest doing the same thing. Unless your butter has started to soften, then you can just toss it in the mixer. Otherwise, cut it into small pieces and go ahead and place it in there. All right, so I'm going to give you a chance to get your butter cut, because since I didn't cut mine, I know that's going to take you maybe a minute or two. So you can go ahead and get it cut. And then if you'll go ahead and start getting out the rest of your ingredients for the sugar cookies. So we're making the dough first, obviously. So you can start gathering your other ingredients if you don't already have those out. The next one that we're going to be measuring is going to be the sugar. So you can start measuring that, or you can wait for me to kind of show you how to do that. And I'm just going to let everyone catch up with their butter. And I'm adjusting my mixer so that you all can still see a little bit of it there. All right. Now, if at any point we're moving a little too fast, please let us know. And also, you know, something that I didn't mention at the beginning is that we're a very family-friendly classroom. So, you know, we haven't had any problems with any content being posted that is inappropriate, but we just ask you that you use clean language today. And if we have you come up on the screen, that you're dressed appropriately to be on the screen. And I know those are all common sense things, but we just want to make sure everyone is on the same page. All right, so you should have your butter cut and into your bowl, whether you're using the mixing bowl or a bowl and you're going to be mixing by hand. Either is fine. And so we're going to go ahead and measure the sugar. If you're using a cup measure, you're going to do 1 cup plus 1 tablespoon. Make sure you level it off really nicely. I will say that in pastry, in the professional industry, we do weigh everything. And so whenever we're weighing things, we do get more accuracy with it. So if you have a scale, that would be the first choice. But I know a lot of people at home, what you have is cup measure, and that's completely okay. So I'm going to show you a little bit about your scale. If you have a scale, but you haven't really used it to scale ingredients, you would turn your scale on. And I'm going to use this just little plastic container. You could use a bowl. You could use any type of container. But I turned my scale on, and we're using ounces today. So I have mine on the pound and ounces setting. I'm going to put my container on there, and you can't really see what my scale is reading, but the container weighs something, okay? So now I'm going to press the tare button. Tare for this situation is spelled T-A-R-E. So press that button, and what that does is it zeroes out your scale, and that makes it really nice because now it's only going to measure the ingredients that you're putting in there, and you don't have to try to do math in your head to you know, subtract out that container. So from here, if you're weighing, you're going to weigh 7.5 ounces of sugar. So I have my big sugar bin here. So I'm going to go ahead and start to pour my sugar in. And I will say that it can be helpful that if you have just a regular little spoon nearby, then that way, like I've gone a little over, so now I can just take a little bit out to get to that 7.5. You know, in cooking, we might be able to vary on amounts a little bit. With baking, we need it to be accurate. So you need it to be exactly, you know, if you're scaling, it'd be exactly 7.5. You don't want to say, oh, it's 7.8, we're close enough. You know, that can get you in trouble with your baking since it's so scientific. But if you were cooking on the stovetop and you were making something savory, you could add a little dash of this or a dash of that. But in baking, you know, sometimes we fail when we do that. So just try to keep it measured as precisely as you can. And you can go ahead and pour your sugar into the mixer. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get everything measured, and I'm going to let you decide how you're going to do this at home, but I'm going to go ahead and go through the steps of measuring everything, and then if you want to measure things as you're adding them to your mixer, that's completely fine, but I just want to make sure everyone knows what's going on, and then when my mixer starts running and there's some noise, we're all on the same page. So the next thing is going to be your salt. So I am using a fine ground sea salt, but you can certainly use an iodized salt, just any type of salt that is really fine ground. And like I said, if you're doing unsalted butter, you're going to do the whole 3/4 teaspoon. And if you're using salted butter, just do a half, okay? So I'm doing the unsalted butter, so I'll do a half teaspoon. And then I've got to add the 1/4 teaspoon to get my 3/4, because that's the measure I have. And so that's our salt. So we're not adding that to the mixer yet. I'm just sitting that to the side. You're going to need 1 egg. So I'm going to go ahead and get my egg cracked. So I'm just going to crack it on the table and go ahead and get it ready to go. And you can see when you crack on your countertop or your table, I don't know if you can see it on my table, but I definitely have egg white on my table. And it's very important. You don't want bacteria to start to grow on your countertops. So this is when we would need to use a cleaner and make sure that that gets cleaned off. So I'm going to grab my sanitizer, and I'm going to make sure that that egg white gets cleaned up so that it doesn't stay on the surface of my table. All right, so I've got that wiped up. And again, we're not putting the egg into the mixer. I'm just getting all of my ingredients mixed. And I just want everyone to see the process. Don't feel rushed because you're going to have time to kind of get things measured as we're mixing also. So as far as the milk goes, so we're just working down the list. The milk, I am using whole milk, but you can use whatever milk you have at your house. You know, in baking, the recipe plans on the full fat ingredients. So a lot of times I get asked in class, you know, what kind of milk are you using? What kind of sour cream? What kind of cream cheese? Those sorts of questions. And it's always the full fat. So, but you're going to use what you have at your house. If you use 2% at your house, you're going to use 2%. If you use almond milk at your house, you're going to use almond milk. So with milk, it's kind of nice. Milk can be either liquid measured in a liquid measuring cup, or it can be weighed and it's the same amount, okay? So you can see on your recipe it says 1.5 fluid ounces, so that means you would use a liquid measure, but since it weighs the same, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna weigh mine because I like to use the scale to make sure that it's accurate. So it can be a little tricky with liquid. I try to go really slow and try not to go over. If I do, I use a little spoon. So there's my 1.5 ounces, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and get my vanilla ready to go. I'm using a Mexican vanilla. And, you know, if at home you're like, well, I have almond extract, I would rather use that, you certainly can. So I like to use vanilla for the cookie part, but you can certainly use a different type of extract for this part. So I'm going to go ahead and measure my vanilla. I'm just going to wipe out my teaspoons a little bit. They have a little bit of salt in them, okay? And so it's 3/4 of a teaspoon of vanilla. Now this is, like I mentioned, you could measure as we're mixing in just a few minutes. But the vanilla, you definitely don't want to try to measure your vanilla over your mixing bowl because it's really easy to over pour. And then not only are you wasting some of your expensive vanilla, but it's going to be too strong. And so I like to do it into a cup. And then if I over pour, I can always put it back in the bottle. So we have our vanilla. And so we're going to move on down the line. You see in my sugar cookie recipe, I use cake flour. And, you know, people will say, what's your secret ingredient in a recipe or a dish? And I always say, like in my sugar cookies, my secret ingredient is my cake flour. And, you know, if you're using all-purpose flour today, that is completely fine. We had questions about that. And if that's what you have at your house, then that's completely okay. So as far as the cake flour goes, the reason it's my secret ingredient is cake flour has less protein in the flour. So it's kind of on the bottom end of the scale. And then up here is our all-purpose, and at the top of the protein levels is our bread flours. So using a flour that has such a low amount of protein, when we mix it, it'll create less gluten, and it actually makes a softer, more delicate sugar cookie. And so if you have cake flour, definitely use that. If you have all-purpose, then you'll use all-purpose today and maybe try cake flour a different day. We have someone asking about the milk. How many cups is that? And my suggestion is to use a liquid measure, some sort of liquid measure, or if you have no liquid measures at your house, you can do 3 tablespoons. It won't be exactly right, but it'll be close enough, okay? So you could use 3 tablespoons for your milk. It might be a little bit off, but I think it'll be close enough. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get my cake flour in my bin here. I'm gonna roll it over here. Now, some folks, I always get asked, like, if you haven't bought cake flour before, people will ask me, well, you know, where is cake flour in the store? How do I buy it? I've never seen it. So cake flour is, you know, one of those flours that's at the very top of the shelf in the grocery store. It doesn't get used as often, and typically it's on the top shelf, and it's in a 2-pound box. So everyone is always looking for a bag like the other flours, but it's typically in a box, and the most common brand has a swan on the front of it, but just look for a 2-pound box on the top shelf, and I think you'll be able to find it. It's pretty easy to find. Most all grocery stores have it. And this time I'm going to use a bowl because it's going to be a larger amount. I'm doing 15 ounces of flour. So if you're measuring this in cups, you're going to do 3.5 cups. It's not going to be exact, but just do the best you can. Make sure you level off the top. And so I'm going to place my bowl on my scale. you definitely want to make sure you tare it again so that it's 0. And I'm going to scale my 15 ounces of flour. So, how are we doing out there? Doing okay this morning? Don't feel rushed. All right, so got to play with it a little bit. I've got my 15 ounces now. So I had to take a little out, put a little back in. That's pretty normal whenever you're using a scale. And then our last ingredient, so that was our cake flour. Our last ingredient is our baking powder. So I've got this big tub here. I'm almost out of the big tub, actually. And some of our ingredients have been a little harder to find, so I've not been able to find our big tub here in Chattanooga. So I may end up having to use something else. So if you're scaling this, the amount is 0.45 ounces, which I probably should just change the recipe to 0.4, because I find like most scales go to a 1/10 of an ounce, but if yours goes to the 100th, you can get it as close as you can. Sometimes it's really hard with the 100th because it's such a tiny amount to actually get it to 0.45. So if you're weighing, you're going to do 0.4. That's not 4 ounces. I want to make that very clear. That's a decimal point. So 0.4. And then you're doing 1 tablespoon if you are measuring it with your teaspoons and tablespoons, okay? 1 tablespoon. You can see 0.4 is a very small amount. So again, it's not 4 ounces. It's a decimal point, 0.4. And I'm only reiterating those things because those are some things that have happened along the way. So we have our ingredients ready. If yours aren't completely measured yet, like I said, that's completely okay. I'm going to move my cake flour out of the way. And we're going to start to mix. Now, in pastry, we have all these different kinds of methods that we use. And I always joke that when I went to culinary school, if I showed up at one of my baking classes and I hadn't done the reading out of my book the night before, what happened was I'd get to class and have no clue what was going on, because my recipes, rather than having these detailed instructions laid out, it literally just has the method. And so this is called the creaming method. And if I would show up to class and didn't read about what the creaming method was and the procedure for that, I would have no clue what was going on, and I knew it was already going to be kind of a difficult day for me. So this is the creaming method. If you want to write that down on your recipe, you can, but most all cookie doughs use this method. So we have our sugar and our butter. If you're mixing this by hand, go ahead and start working that arm. But you're going to lower your mixer. I just want to reiterate, in case anybody missed it, that we are using the paddle attachment today. And so we're going to place that on the mixer, and you're going to carefully lower your mixer. We have some people buying mixers and using them for the first time in our classes, which is super exciting. So you want to hold this as you're lowering it. And then when you're looking at the mixer on the right side, it's going to lock it down. So you want to definitely lock down your mixer so that it doesn't start to jump on you while you're mixing. And then, we always start out on speed 1, which on most KitchenAids it says stir. So start out on stir. We definitely don't want that sugar to start coming out of our bowl and losing the ingredients that we've so carefully measured. And as the butter starts to mix in, we can slowly turn up. So I'm going to turn up to 2nd speed now. The highest speed that we're going to go with this is speed 4. All right, I'm going to stop my mixer for a minute and show you all. My butter, and you can see that in the corner of my screen, my butter is sticking to my attachment. So I need to use either my fingers or a spatula or a spoon, and I need to push that in because it was kind of starting to just stay there. So I'm going to lock it down again. I'm going to go back to speed 2. And then as more of my sugar mixes in, I'm going to be able to increase the speed and really nicely cream that together. Now, typically, when we're doing the creaming method, you always start with whatever fat it is and the sugar. And the reason we use the sugar is it actually helps smooth the fat. So sugar is it feels like sand when we put our hands in there. So it is so coarse that it helps to smooth the butter. And we want to make sure that the butter is nice and smooth with no lumps before we start adding other ingredients. So you may need to take a little longer than I'm going to take. And I'm going to increase this to speed 4 now. Okay, and I'm going to let this mix really, really well, all right? And then I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to show you how to scrape it down. And we have a hand raised. Okay, so Rachel, you're asking about the butter. The butter can be cold. Now, if you're mixing by hand, it does make it a little bit more difficult, and I would cut it into small pieces, and that's going to help you get it softened a little bit faster. But on your mixer, you can definitely do cold butter and easily go with it. But it'll take a little bit different time. So there's no right or wrong, but butter can stay at room temperature for a few days. So, anytime you're going to be mixing a dough or making an icing, depending on what it is, you can have your butter at room temperature as long as it's more of a cool room temperature rather than, if you keep your house really warm, like 80 degrees, that's going to be too warm. But if you have it at a nice temperature of like between 68 and 72 or somewhere in there, then it would be fine to leave out. And so what you're going to do, you see I stopped my mixer, and don't be nervous if your butter is not completely blended in yet. I'm going to scrape down the sugar and the butter that's in there and get that scraped down to the bottom. And then your attachment, you can scrape it off a little bit too. Typically as long as everything is scraped to the bottom half of your attachment, you're going to be good to go. So the whole thing doesn't necessarily have to be scraped off, just so the top portion is pushed down. And then I'm going to go ahead and lower my mixer and mix just a few more seconds on speed 4. And again, we're just using the creaming method. So right now we have our butter and our granulated sugar. And we're working on the sugar cookie dough. All right, so if you're following along, that was step number 1 there. And so we're moving on to step number 2. So now I like to stop my mixer. You don't have to tilt it back. That's completely up to you. I'm going to do that so you all can see a little bit better. But you're going to go ahead and put that 1 egg in the mixer, okay? And my suggestion would not be to crack the egg into the mixing bowl, because then you're not going to be able to see if shell is in there. So you would always want to use like something different to crack your egg into, to make sure your shell is completely removed, if that's the case. And then I'm going to add my vanilla extract as well. And we're going to go ahead and get this mixing. Okay, so I'm going to lower my mixer back down. And I'm going to get this mixed in. And again, you want to start out on speed 1 and increase the speed as you're able to. And the highest speed is speed 4. So it looks separated now, and I'm going to slowly increase, and it's going to create more friction. So now I'm up to speed 4, and it's going to help get all of that blended together. And it's still going to look a little bit strange because that's a lot of butter that we started with. So until we get the flour in, it might look a little bit separated or not completely mixed together. All right, so once it looks pretty good, okay, you're going to go ahead. And so basically when I say pretty good, all my egg has mixed in, all my vanilla has mixed in. It's not a perfect batter yet because not all of our ingredients are in there, but I can't see any of the egg or any of the vanilla at this point. And so now we're going to add all the dry ingredients. And for this, I'm sorry, we're going to do the milk first. Don't want to forget the milk. So milk is step number 3. So go ahead and add your milk. I was getting ahead. Okay. So add your milk. Go ahead and get it locked down. And I'm going to start out slow again. I think you'll know real quick if you've started out too fast because it'll typically like spray some of it out of your mixer. Back to 4 for a few seconds so you can kind of see the pattern. Always start out low and increase. And now it's going to look even more separated. But as soon as you see that all of the milk has been a little bit absorbed, then you're good to go. But it definitely, mine looks separated, so if yours looks separated, you haven't done anything wrong at this point. And then what we're going to do is add the dry ingredients now, which is step number 4. And with the dry ingredients, we're not having to sift for this part, okay? So anytime I'm making a cookie dough, it creates enough friction to take care of all the lumps. So no sifting is necessary because it's going to be a really thick dough. So I'm going to go ahead, and our dry ingredients are, basically the rest of what we have left, which is our cake flour. So you're going to dump all of the dry ingredients in at one time, whether you're using the mixer or doing this by hand. You want to add them all at one time. If we add the flour in stages, it'll actually create more gluten because you'll be mixing, adding more, mixing, adding more. So you want to add it all at one time, and you can see, like, because of the moisture in Chattanooga, we tend to have, our dry ingredients like to stick to whatever we put them in. And so we're going to go ahead and put that into the mixer. And we have our baking powder and our salt, okay? And we haven't started mixing yet, okay? So let's go ahead and just review where we're at, okay? So we creamed the butter and the sugar until there were no lumps in the butter. And then we went on to step number 2. We added the eggs and the vanilla. Mixed that just until it was combined, and we added the milk, step number 3. And now we're on to step number 4, where we've added the dry ingredients, which is the cake flour, the baking powder, and the salt, okay? And we're gonna lower our mixer. My advice, if you're using the mixer, someone asked, how do you get it to keep it from flying out? All you gotta do is speed 1, and you will be just fine. The speed 1. This is not something that I would recommend using your hand mixer for, okay? So you're either using a kitchen stand mixer, or you're using a bowl and you're mixing it by hand in the bowl, okay? So I have it on speed 1 right now. You can see that none of my flour is flying out, and I am going to go ahead and slowly turn it up to speed 4, and it'll seem fast. And just put it on speed 4 for just a few seconds and then stop, okay? Like I said, the more we mix something, the more the gluten is created. And if we're using a cake flour already, that creates a very small amount of gluten. That means we want a small amount of gluten. So I'm going to go ahead and do a scrape because I see some dry ingredients up on the side of my bowl. So, but as long as you're starting out on speed 1 and then increasing it once the flour absorbs, you will not have any flour on the table. Now, if you accidentally bump it up to speed 4 right away, you may get a dusting on your table, and you'll want to collect that and put it back into your mixer, okay? So I'm just doing a scrape. My dough on my attachment looks good. I just had some dry ingredients on the top edge of the bowl, so I am going to go ahead. So just to reiterate what I was doing, because Ted said he hadn't turned the screen back yet, I just scraped the edges of my bowl. Okay, and I pushed the rest of the flour down inside there, and I'm not worrying about my attachment. And I'm going to go ahead and just put it on 4th speed for 3 seconds, okay? 1, 2, 3. Shut it off, okay? You want a really small amount of time. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'll just let it mix for a while, let it blend, make sure it's good. And they might walk away for a few seconds to do something else. For this, that's bad because we want it to be very delicate. We want there to be less gluten developed. So you're only mixing just until it's done. So let me show you here. So my cookie dough is finished, all right? It's definitely not ready to roll. I'm gonna show you what we're gonna do. I'm gonna move my mixer out of the way, and you are gonna need your plastic wrap, or if you're like, oh gosh, I'm out of plastic wrap, I haven't been able to buy some, if you have a gallon Ziploc bag, that would work as well. And so I'm gonna go ahead, and I have this huge commercial plastic wrap, so I'm gonna bring that over. And what I would suggest is you're gonna pull a big piece of plastic wrap off your roll, okay? So get yourself a pretty good sized piece and get it onto the countertop, okay? And so you can see I've got my plastic wrap laying here. And then what you're gonna do is you're going to not only scrape your paddle attachment off, but you're gonna start to scoop all of your dough out. And you know, I'm gonna go in with my hands because I like to do this with my fingers because it's easier with your paddle attachment to actually trace it with these 2 fingers, okay? I wouldn't get your whole hand in there, that gets quite messy. But if you can kind of go down through and trace with just these 2 fingers to get that dough off. It's a little easier than using your spatula or your spoon. All right, and if you're using the KitchenAid today, you'll want to go ahead and put this into hot soapy water so you can get it washed. We are going to be using it again today, and along with your bowl. So your bowl will need to go to the wash as well. Now, you can use whatever means necessary to get the rest out of the bowl. I will say, you can use your spatula, but also I have these bowl scrapers. So if you have these at your house, these are a flexible plastic scraper. This is what would actually be used for something like this, is you would actually come into the bowl and you can literally scrape all the dough out of your mixing bowl really, really well. And I know, like when I'm doing this at home with my kids, they don't like me to scrape the bowl this clean, because then there's nothing left for them to eat. So if you have some kiddos at your house, you can definitely decide. You have plenty of dough here. You can definitely taste some of it. This is your class. You have permission if you need permission. And so I'm going to get this scraped out. And Chef Ted is going to take my glass bowl to be washed. Thank you, sir. And so I have my dough on my plastic. What you're going to do is fold your plastic over, but not super tight, because then you're going to press it down so that it's only 1 inch thick, okay? And when we're talking about 1 inch, okay, I have my little ruler here. It's been very helpful in my classes. We're talking a very small amount, okay? So don't make it super thick, but also don't make it thin as a pancake, because it's going to be hard to work with. So about 1 inch thick. Wrap it up, and you're going to take this to your refrigerator. When I'm rolling sugar cookie dough, I like to refrigerate it for a minimum of 20 minutes, up to overnight. So you could actually make this the day before and just put it in your refrigerator for you to work with the next day, okay? So I will be back in just a moment. And it looks like we have a question on Q&A, so we will answer that question. So I'm just putting my dough into the refrigerator, and I'm going to come back with you all. And so we have a question: what do I do if my dough is very, very crumbly? So if it's crumbly, it may need to just mix longer. So if you're mixing it by hand, it'll take even longer than what it took us on the mixer. If you're mixing it on the mixer, then you probably need to increase speed to 4 and give it a little more friction and bring it all together. If it still is crumbly, because you certainly don't want to take it out of the mixer when it's crumbly, because when we go to roll it, we'll definitely have problems, which I'm sure that you thought about that. And so we definitely want to bring it together. So if you put it on speed 4, or you really vigorously stir it and it's still not coming together, then you can add another teaspoon of milk until it comes together. But I would wait to do that until you see if it really needs it, because when we're talking about that much butter, sometimes it takes a while for it to actually get mixed in, and then it'll be a really nice dough in the end. And so I would give it a little patience, stir a little bit longer, and see if you can get it to that dough, okay? Chef Ted's going to send you a chat message just to kind of correspond with you a little bit. So if you want to correspond with Ted for a couple minutes on the chat, and then we'll go from there. Thank you. I'm not rushing you all, so take as much time as you need for that. I'm going to wait a couple minutes, but for those of you that are done, because we have all different skill levels on this class, you're going to go ahead and start collecting the ingredients for the simple buttercream. So we're still on the first page of your recipe handout, but we're down at the simple buttercream now. And so you can go ahead and start collecting. I'm going to clean my station, so get your stations cleaned, start collecting your ingredients for that, and we'll give everyone a chance to get caught up with their dough, okay? Cookie doughs, once they get completely mixed, it is going to be a soft dough. It's definitely not going to feel like a dough that we're going to be able to roll. So it's going to be sticky, it's going to be soft. And, you think about the amount of butter that's in that recipe. That butter, once it goes in the fridge, is going to solidify. And it's going to make a really nice dough for us to work with. And it's going to be super delicious because we're using all butter. So again, we're just allowing everyone to get caught up with their dough. You're going to go ahead and get your dough mixed and get it wrapped up. And I'm just cleaning my station and You know, if you're cleaning your station too, you can start gathering your ingredients for the buttercream, but we're not going to move on until we know that everyone is ready. All right. You're doing great out there. You can do this. I know you can. We're not going to be mixing our icing yet. I love that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get our ingredients ready for the buttercream and get them sat to the side. So for the simple buttercream, we are using 6 ounces of butter again, which is 1.5 sticks. So go ahead and get your butter cut up into smaller pieces and get it into either your mixing bowl, or you can just like lay it out on the countertop somewhere where it can start to soften a little bit. If your butter's already softened, you can go ahead and put it into your mixing bowl or whatever bowl you're going to be mixing in. So again, 6 ounces of butter is 1.5 sticks. So you can go ahead and get that cut into pieces and get it ready to go off to the side. And then you're going to need, and we're not putting this all in the bowl. The butter is going to be the only thing in the bowl right now. So, you know, we're being asked cold or room temperature butter again. And so the butter, you know, ideally for an icing, room temperature is great, but we're not making it right away, so it's going to have time to start to soften. So what you're going to do is take your butter, cut it into small pieces, and go ahead and sit it to the side. If it's room temperature, you don't need to cut it. If it's on the colder side, cutting it will allow it to soften before we're going to use it. And so you're going to need 2 teaspoons approximately of water. So it may not be that full amount today. The amount of moisture in the air changes the amount of water we're going to need. So just have a little bit of water nearby. I'm going to go ahead and measure out the 2 teaspoons, but as long as you just have water accessible to you with a little teaspoon measure, you will be good to go. And again, we're not putting this in the mixer right now. And then, so I'm just going down the list. So we got our butter, our water. I'm going to weigh my powdered sugar. If you're measuring it, it is 3 cups. And I'm going to go ahead, put my bowl on my scale, get my scale zeroed out, bring my powdered sugar on over. So we call this our mise en place. It's a French term to get everything in place and get it all ready. And so we're getting all of our mise en place ready for our buttercream. And so I'm weighing 12 ounces of powdered sugar. Okay, you're going to have lots of icing, by the way. So lots of, you know, some people like to use more glaze on their cookies. Some people like to use more icing. So you'll have the option for either, depending on what you desire. And so now we're moving on to the extract. Again, you can use whatever flavor you would like, but I wouldn't suggest, like, you know, if you used almond in the cookie dough instead of vanilla, I wouldn't use almond in the icing and almond in the glaze. That would be way too much almond, but and probably lemon and some other extracts. So I'm going to use vanilla in my icing as well. And then when I go to do my glaze, I may do a little bit of something different in my glaze. So I'm going to measure out my vanilla extract. So it's 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. So it's nice to have some sort of flavor, but again, if you put almond in your dough and that's all that you have, then I would skip it on the icing so that it's not too strong. Other things that you can put in your icing to flavor it other than extracts would be like lemon zest or orange zest or lime zest. Things like that to just give it a little hint of flavor, but not a really strong flavor is nice as well. And so we're going to sit that off to the side. So I've got over here, kind of out of view, which is on purpose, I have my butter in my bowl waiting. I also have my powdered sugar measured and ready to go, my vanilla, and my water. And so I want to talk about food coloring, and it's completely up to you today whether you're going to use food coloring or not. And if you picked up ingredient package from me, I put in 3 different colors for you, and if you want to use any of those, you can. And so what I wanted to talk to you about is the coloring that I'm using today. Let me find a label that's pretty clean. Is Americolor, which gets us really nice results. We use this for the French macaron class as well. It's a gel paste coloring. This is a really big bottle, but they sell it in smaller bottles at craft stores, and I've even seen it at Walmart at different times. So that's something really easy to find out there at a regular store. And then another brand I like to use, which typically you would have to order this online, it's called Chef Master, and it's also a gel paste coloring, and it comes more in tub form. Now these are smaller tubs, but they also sell it in larger tubs as well. And both of these, colorings get used professionally, and you get really good results from them. You don't typically get any flavor, and it takes a really small amount to actually color it the color that you want. Now, these colors are not intended to really be blended together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest like, oh, I'm going to do orange and I'm going to add a little yellow to it. I mean, yeah, they look like primary colors in my box here, but I actually ordered that specific color to use, and that's how these companies sell the colors. They have hundreds of colors, and you buy exactly the color you want to use. And so you do get better results that way. Sometimes when you start to mix the colors together, you will get a little bit of graying or a little bit of browning, and it'll look a little bit off because it was designed for that particular color. So you might want to just have it nearby, or if you need to find it in the cupboard, you can do that. And I'm going to sit this off to the side for now, because we are going to move on to, we're just having our ingredients ready for our buttercream, and we're moving on to rolling our cookie dough. And what I'd like you to do is I would like you to leave your cookie dough in the refrigerator and just take a moment to relax, and you're going to watch me go through the basic steps of rolling a dough. And then we're going to let you roll your dough. So I find, like, even with the virtual classes, even though you're at home and you're able to do this at the same time, it is helpful to have you pause sometimes and just watch, and then do it yourself so that you fully understand and you don't miss any of the pieces involved. So I'm going to grab, for this part, you're going to need a rolling pin, okay? You're also going to need some sort of cookie sheet with parchment paper. And you can see I have a whole variety of cookie cutters here. You can use whatever you have at your house. If you picked up ingredients from me yesterday, we typically don't give you any equipment. We give you pastry bags and parchment paper, but we don't give you equipment. So what ends up happening is if I have an extra thing to throw in, I've been doing that. So I had some fluted cookie cutters, which were really cute. So I threw that in there. And then I also, so everybody got one of those. And then I had some pastry tips. So I threw in a star, a little star. So typically, again, that wouldn't be something that we would include in the ingredient pickup, but I had it, so I thought I'd share it with you. And so we have our parchment paper on our baking pan. We also have our rolling pin. Chef Ted just got me my dough out of the fridge. It's starting to firm, but I'd like you to keep your dough in there a little bit longer. It will make it easier for you. And then have some cookie cutters on hand. And you know, if you have one cookie cutter, that is going to be perfect, okay? You don't need multiple. But I will show you that most all of my cookie cutters are in that, let me get my orange, actually. Yeah, they're all in that like 2.5 to 3 inch range. So if you're wondering what size I'm using, they're all 2.5 to 3 inches. So it's, you know, it's going to be a decent sized cookie whenever it's done. All right. If you have smaller, no worries. Then you'll use your smaller cutters. And when we go to bake them, they're going to take less time to bake. Okay. Now, we also need some dusting flour to roll with. And even though we're using cake flour in the dough, I like to use all-purpose flour to dust on my surface. So you can, if you have all-purpose, you will grab your all-purpose flour. So I'm just grabbing a cup full of my all-purpose flour out of my bin. My bins are so big that I can't put them up on the table. And so I have a little bit of all-purpose flour here. All right. And then what I'd like you to do is go ahead and turn your ovens on so that they can preheat. So we are going to do 350 degrees. And if I would do regular bake setting. If your oven has the convection setting, just do regular bake with no convection. You're going to get less browning. Your cookies are going to stay a little bit softer, okay? I have a question up on the Q&A, so I'm going to read the question so that everybody can hear it, and I'm going to answer. So if we couldn't get parchment paper, can we use a Silpat, like a silicone baking mat? Or would it be better to just grease the cookie sheet itself? So my suggestion, so when we're using a Silpat for cookies, it typically makes them spread, and we don't want them to spread, okay? So I would not use the silicone mat for this situation. I would go ahead and grease your pan lightly but thoroughly. And so if you have spray, you might want to spray it on and then take a paper towel and kind of move it around so it's not puddled up on the pan. If you have vegetable shortening, that can be used as well. You're just going to spread it on. And again, thoroughly, but not too heavy. And as far as wax paper goes, wax paper does have a wax film on it, and it'll make whatever you're baking stick to it. So I would completely avoid wax paper altogether, and you could grease your cookie sheet, okay? So I was just answering a question for Chef Ted, so he had muted me for just a moment. So if you saw my mouth moving, but I was muted, Chef Ted does mute me every once in a while because he's answering some questions in chat, and he just doesn't want to confuse anyone, so he does press me on mute. Now, again, your dough is still in the fridge, but you need to have your oven preheating. So I turned my oven on 350, no convection setting, okay? And what I want you to do is have a nice big area that you're gonna roll your cookies out. And again, you're watching right now, you're not doing. And I'm gonna be rolling here. So I'm gonna try to knead my dough off to the side here. It is better to knead off to the side rather than where you're going to be rolling. If you knead where you're gonna be rolling and you start rolling in that spot, it automatically creates a sticky spot that your dough starts sticking. Also, when I'm kneading my dough, I'm not going to knead it for very long, and I'm not going to use any flour. So I have no flour on the table, no flour on my dough, and I'm going to knead by folding in half. I press lightly, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate, fold in half again, and press lightly. All we're doing here is getting our dough pliable. So we're folding, we're pressing, and we're turning. And I like to start to roll my dough a little bit, okay? And so I've got this pliable, and it's all the same temperature now, okay? It's only gonna take, I think that was 5 to 6 times, so a very small amount of time. Keep in mind that our hands are warm, and that warmth is transferring to our dough. The colder we're able to keep our dough, the easier it's gonna be to work with. And you're gonna go ahead and do like a medium dusting underneath your dough. So I moved away from where I kneaded, where it's a little bit sticky, and I've moved over here now. And so you're going to heavily dust. Now, what you want to keep in mind, and this is dough rolling 101 here, okay? So no matter what you're rolling, you can use these methods. When you dust your flour down, you would never want to dust it and then spread it around, okay? You can see here, it's not going to do the same thing as all these little piles are going to do. So these piles are going to actually keep our dough up off the table. This way, if we move it around, there's some really thin spots and some really heavy spots, and that's not going to work. So I place my dough down on my floured surface, leaving the piles, and I'm going to dust a very small amount on the top, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and start to roll. Now, I want to show you when you're rolling, and I prefer a straight rolling pin for pastry rather than a tapered rolling pin. You're going to get better even rolling with it because it is the same the whole distance. If you have one with handles, that is completely fine. If yours is smaller than mine, that's fine too. But what you're going to do is you're going to place it in the center of your dough, and you're going to lightly press. So you're going to start out pressing very delicately. And again, you're watching with me right now, okay? So this would be just like it would be in a regular class with us, okay? Because you'd be at my demonstration table, you would be watching, and then you'd go back to your station and you'd start rolling. So you can see I rolled very delicately to start evening it out. I will say, if you go hard and you start rolling and pressing really hard, it's going to automatically make the dough start to stick to your rolling pin. So you go very slow with it, and then we're going to turn the dough. There's a couple more things you need to know, okay? So all my flour has disappeared. So I'm doing a tiny sprinkling on the top, okay? Just tiny sprinkle, leaving those little piles. And I'm going to put my rolling pin back on my dough, and I'm going to continue to roll. But keep in mind that you're pressing gently, and also you never want to go off the edges of the dough. If you go off the edges of the dough on the top or the bottom as you're rolling, it's going to actually press and pinch it to the table. It'll start to stick to the table, and it'll start to stick to your rolling pin. So you see when I roll, I just go to the edge and come back just to the edge, okay? So as you're rolling, you're gonna only roll 3 to 4 times back and forth, and then you'll stop and you'll turn your dough, okay? So I know there's been many times where you roll out dough and it is stuck to your table or your countertop when you're done. So what we need to keep in mind is we're constantly moving our dough, and we're only rolling the rolling pin one direction. So I always say up and back, and that's it, straight forward, okay? So I'm going to start to roll a little bit more gently, okay, gently. Now, we are going to a 1/4 of an inch or even a 1/3 of an inch. It can be rather thick for sugar cookies. Again, I'm rolling and turning, and I don't, you visibly really can't see any flour on the top of my dough, and there really isn't any there. So as long as my dough is not wanting to roll up onto my rolling pin, then we are going to be good to go. So again, you're not rolling off the edges, and you want to make sure you're not rolling too many times before you turn the dough. When I turn the dough, I'm just dragging it. I'm not picking it up. If at any point, whenever you go to move your dough, it's stuck a little bit in one spot, then what you can do is you can gently pick up your dough, roll it back on your hands, and I'm holding it in my hand so that it doesn't break my dough in half. You can sprinkle flour down. You can lay it back down, okay? And you're not behind because you're not supposed to be rolling right now. You're just watching. And you can pick up the other side, gently roll it back, and sprinkle more flour down and put it down. Mine wasn't sticking at all, but I wanted to show you that procedure so that you knew what to do if it started sticking. You don't want to pick up your whole piece of dough and move it over. Your fingertips are going to go through the dough, okay? So we have to be really careful with the ways that we move it. And so I'm really close. Again, we want to go a 1/4 of an inch or even a little thicker to make a really nice sugar cookie. Not only do we use the cake flour, but it also needs to be a thicker dough. If it's thin, it's going to be crisp no matter what, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I have my roller just to kind of show you all. Yeah, mine is a little over a 1/4 of an inch, so it was about right here. So just to kind of give you reference. And so we want them to be thick. And then I want you to see just a couple more things, okay, before I set you loose to go get your dough and you're going to work on it. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your cookie cutters. Once your dough is ready, if you have a lot of flour on the top, I would use your hands, brush it off, get that excess off of your dough on the top. Don't worry about the bottom, okay? So dip in the flour, and then you're going to cut, okay? You can probably hear my oven preheating. So cut gently, take it out of the cutter, place it onto the pan. Now, my pan is 12 inches by 17 approximately. And so on my pan, when I'm using cookie cutters that are in that size range that I mentioned, that 2.5 to 3 inch, you can put 3 across and 4 cookies down. So, but if you're using a smaller pan, you might need to go ahead and use, do less on the pan. You want to make sure they mostly rise up. They'll puff out a little bit, but you want to make sure there's room between each of the cookies. And you're going to go ahead and cut out all of your cookies, whatever shapes that you're going to do, and get them on the pan. Now, if you're using different sizes, like mine are all, and I do this on purpose, they're all about approximately the same size. Then they can all bake together. But if you have some that are smaller and some that are larger, you're going to want to put those on separate pans because your smaller cookies will get way overbaked before the larger cookies are ready. So what you're going to do is you're going to get all of your cookies cut out, leaving space between them, and you're going to put them into the oven. Now, as far as the way the oven goes, I never put time on my recipe, and that really throws people off, okay? So I wait. Everybody's oven's a little bit different, so I would suggest starting your timer for 8 minutes and then you're going to turn them, and you're going to do a few more minutes until they've got a little bit of golden browning just happening around the edge. But we are certainly going to show you that. I just know that people will start to ask, so I want to throw that out there. So you have permission to go to the fridge, get your dough, and don't forget, we're kneading the dough off to the side with no flour. No flour. Knead your dough. Don't get it too soft, just all the same temperature, a little bit pliable. And I didn't mention, but if you start with like a disc, something that's round, flatten it out a little bit, you'll have more success with rolling. But when you move your dough over here to roll, make sure you're putting that flour on the countertop, a little flour on the top, and start pressing very gently whenever you start, okay? So I'm going to let you go. I'm going to answer a Q&A, a question that we have, and I'm going to let you roll and start cutting, and I'm going to be doing the same thing here, okay? So so we have a question about their dough. They've taken it out of the fridge, and the dough seems a little crumbly. And so what I would suggest is if you need to knead that dough a little extra to make sure all the dough comes together, you can do that, okay? So I would say the warmth of your hands is going to help bring that dough back together so that you're going to be able to roll it out. So you should be kneading your dough right now off to the side with no flour. And then when you're ready to roll, you're going to go ahead and do that. I do prefer rolling with all-purpose flour, but if you have something else, you can use that. And I'm sad I can't share all my cookie cutters with you because I have like bins and bins of cookie cutters. So one day we'll be able to share them again. You can see I try to cut them out really close together so that I can get the most out of my first roll as I possibly can. I love this little guy. I got a little ice cream cone here. All right, I hope you're doing good out there. You got this. Dough rolling can be one of the hardest things to do. And that's why I wanted you to just kind of sit and listen and watch before you started rolling your own dough so that you got to listen to all the details. So if some of you out there are like, she's going way too fast, I'm supposed to be ahead of you right now. You're not supposed to be at the same spot that I'm at. All right. So if your dough is still soft and it needs to refrigerate a little bit longer, you will let it refrigerate. I mean, we'll definitely proceed with class, but you know, some folks, that work at a little bit slower pace, or like something out of your control has slowed you down a little bit, no worries. You're still going to be able to learn in the class, and you might be a little bit behind us, but no fear. You can always finish rolling your cookies after class if that's necessary, or something like that as well. So do what you need to do at your house. I know some people said like they just finished mixing their dough and it's going in the fridge, and I know we don't have very many. We might have one or two people. And then someone else said their dough was a little sticky, so you can go ahead and let it refrigerate maybe for another 5 or 10 minutes and then get started. So I rolled out one pan, and this is the most that I can fit on this pan with my size of cookies, so just to give you a good look at that. So I'm going to grab my other pan, and I just want to show you all that I have 2 cut out, but then I don't like to waste dough, so I always re-roll. So, at some point, you're going to be ready to re-roll, so I want to show you how this is going to happen, okay? So I have all my scrap dough here. I'm going to gather it together. I'm going to shake off. If it has a lot of flour on it, I need to shake that off and bring it back over to my kneading spot where there's no flour. And I'm going to gently fold, press, turn, just like you did a few moments ago, until it looks like a dough again and it doesn't have cracks in it, okay? And yes, it's going to get worked more than the other doughs, so this will have a little bit more gluten than the rest. But you can see I kneaded it until it looked like a nice smooth dough again. And then I bring it back to my surface and I roll again, okay? So the same method, and I'm not going to go through that method because I know some of you are in the middle of mixing, but we knead with no flour, and then we bring it back over here and we roll with flour. Okay, so Kristen, we're going to bring you up on the screen. You have your hand raised, and we're going to see how it's going at your house. All right, so I am just cutting out the rest of my cookies, and I know you all might be rolling for the first time, and that's okay. And so I'm just going to work at getting the rest of mine done and go ahead and get mine in the oven, because if you've been to classes of ours before, you know that we don't typically prep things in advance. We're doing it right here with you. And so I'm going to get my cookies baked so that you're going to be able to see the process of the baking so that you know when yours are done. And I'm going to re-roll a third time because I'm like, I don't want to waste this. So I'm bringing it back over here to the side. And it's really small now, but I'm going to roll it out. I'm sure you have kids at your house that might want to eat that cookie dough, and that's fine. That's up to you. I know people, one of the most common questions about eating cookie dough is like, what about the raw egg? And, you know, that's up to you at your house, whether you're okay with eating the raw egg or not. I will say that you can buy pasteurized eggs at the store if that makes you feel better about it. They have a little P stamped on them, and so you could use pasteurized eggs. But honestly, I have not met a single person in my life that has gotten sick from a raw egg, but I know it's possible. It's definitely a possibility. All right, so got a little bit of dough here, but I'm not gonna, yeah, thank you. Chef Ted's getting me more tea. I love that. All right, so here's my second pan. So you see, let's see how many cookies I got. I got 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I got 19. I probably could have done 20 if I really wanted to. So I have both my cookies going in the oven, and they can both go in together. Okay, and again, don't worry if yours aren't ready to go in the oven. That's completely okay. All right, so I'm starting them out at 8 minutes just to be conservative. I like there to be the tiniest amount of browning on my sugar cookies so that they stay soft. If we brown our sugar cookies like we brown other things that we bake, they still will be crispy. And I've, at least most people, like a softer sugar cookie. It's funny, I remember when we were growing up, my dad would always eat the crispy ones or the burnt ones. And I don't know if he always said he liked them that way, and he ate those ones. And yeah, I've never asked him if he really did like it that way or if he just did that because I like to bake and he wanted to be encouraging. One more thing about your rolling pin. I know some folks at home really like to flour their rolling pin to use it. And so if you're flouring your rolling pin right now, I would suggest against that. It really is better to use your rolling pin completely clean and dry. So if your rolling pin gets caked up with dough or flour, you're going to actually take your towel and completely dry it off and start again with it. So the less flour, the less dough on your rolling pin, the better. If you flour your rolling pin, it'll actually start to pick up dough, and it'll make your rolling pin really sticky, really messy, and then you won't get a nice roll with it. So the cleaner the rolling pin, the better. And so I have my little dry towel, and I just give it a wipe if it gets caked up. Chef Dad, do you mind grabbing a bench scraper for me? I'm going to get this excess flour off my station since I'm going to get cleaned up while our students are rolling their dough and cutting their cookies. So for those of you that have your cookies baking, you see that I cleaned my table and I'm starting to get my ingredients together for this simple buttercream. So I'm not going to start it yet. We're going to let a few more people get ready. And again, maybe not everyone might be ready because because everyone works at a different pace, but we're going to go ahead in a few minutes. We'll get started once, you know, majority of the class has their cookies baking. So again, you can start getting out the simple buttercream ingredients that we talked about before we started rolling. So for the first timer, I set 8 minutes. I like to be conservative, just so things don't get overdone. So I'm going to go ahead and check mine out here. That was the first 8 minutes, actually, that just went off. And so let me see what we got going on here. So Chef Ted, you want to, can you pull up another camera so that everyone at home can see? We're going to show you my cookies. So they're definitely puffing and they're baking. But what I want to show you is I want to turn the pans and I want to switch racks. But you can see there is no browning happening yet. So if you're at the point where they're puffing, they're looking good, they're baking, but there is no browning, then you're not going to turn or switch the racks until you start to see browning. So I'm going to actually do another 4 minutes. So again, I was being conservative because I don't like my sugar cookies to overbake. So that was 8 minutes, but I am going to add 4 onto it. So that first portion for me is going to be 12 minutes before I even probably turn or rotate the pans. Now, the reason I turn and rotate the racks is so that I can try to achieve even browning on the whole pan. I've not met the perfect oven, so if you have the perfect oven, I want to know about it. But I've literally have not met the perfect oven. So we kind of have to adjust things so that it turns out the way we'd like it to turn out, okay? But y'all are doing great. You're going to have some awesomely delicious sugar cookies today that I think you're really going to enjoy. So we have more people baking now. And so we'll wait just another minute or two, and then we'll be ready to start mixing our buttercream. So for those of you that have it in the oven, go ahead and get your buttercream ingredients out. You'll need a bowl to mix, or your KitchenAid bowl will need to be washed with your same attachment, the paddle attachment, okay? And then also, if you have a sifter, or this is really just a strainer that you can wash like fruit and strain pasta, but we use it as our sifter. And so if you have a piece of parchment paper, you can place your sifter on that. We're going to sift the powdered sugar for this recipe, and we can use it for the glaze as well. Oh, you follow Jeff with the camera? That's cool. All right. Hey. So I hope you're having a good time out there, and you'll be able to eat a cookie really soon, because you're definitely going to need to taste them when they come out of the oven, even when they don't have icing, right? You got to have a little sample, enjoy a little bit of, you know, cookie while you're working hard. Okay. So we'll do another close up, Ted. Hopefully I can look first, see if there's browning if you want. All right. My sugar cookies, like I did them a little thicker today, which they're about the 1/3 of an inch, so they're taking a tiny bit longer. So at 12 minutes, I still don't have any browning around the edges, which no fear. I'm going to set another like 3 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and check them again. They're still baking, and they're baking just fine. I just want to make sure I turn them at the right point. If you think about it, if you turn them when there hasn't been any browning yet, then it's just going to brown more on the other side. And so it really is important to make sure they're browning on one side. Everybody learns how their oven works. So once you know, you can make notes on your recipe, like, oh, it took about this long before I had to turn it. And then the next time you'll know. And, I've started doing more of that on my recipes as well, because we bake so many things in here that I can't hardly memorize all of it. And we have 4 ovens, if you've been in our classroom, and each oven is exactly the same brand, same style, bought exactly the same time, started using it at the same time, but they all bake differently. And so it's really hard for me to know. Like, I can give estimates, but since every oven is different, it will be different for everybody. So you're looking for a really light browning just around the outside edge, And then once you see the browning around the outside edge, you're going to see some tiny cracks in the dough around the outside as well. And then the bottom is going to be a golden brown, and then that's when you know it's done, okay? And I know several of you are in the oven, so hopefully mine are still ahead of yours, but if yours end up being closer to that point, just make sure you watch for those things so that yours don't get overdone, okay? So about how many folks have their cookies baking, Chef Ted? Okay, so over half of our class have their cookies baking. And so I'm going to slowly move into this next part. You can go ahead and, if you have a sifter, go ahead and get your sugar sifted. So again, my sugar is wanting to stick in my bowl because it just simply because of the moisture in the air. So I'm just trying to get all of it out of my bowl. And then if you've not used a sifter like this before, like your strainer to sift, you're going to place your hand on the side and you're going to tap against your hand. That's going to help keep it on the paper, but it's also going to help force it through the sifter. So again, this is just part of our prep of getting the ingredients together for the simple buttercream. Simple buttercream really is the term that's used for it, and I use this in a lot of my classes because it is so easy that most people do start to make it at home. And so you can see the rest of it, I just push it through with my hand. And so you're welcome to start sifting. I'm going to check my cookies again. You hear them going off. And hopefully I'm ready to turn. All right, so I see the tiniest amount of browning on the edges. We're talking really light golden. And so I'm going to go ahead and give it a shift. And I don't even know if you'll be able to see it on the camera. I mean, the bottom tray really isn't browning, but the top has the tiniest amount of gold. So I'm going to, I turned the racks, or the pans, but I'm also switching racks just now. And my cookies are really close to being done because they're actually getting those tiny little cracks around the outside edges, like I mentioned. So I'm going to do another just 3 minutes on mine. And depending on your oven, you might not get a lot of browning at all. And that's okay with a sugar cookie. You want to bake it just until it's done. You're not baking it until it has like all this browning on it. We just want to kind of keep an eye so like we mentioned earlier with the even baking, okay? All right, so go ahead and make sure you have your butter, your water, you need a little bit of water, powdered sugar, and the water, can be room temperature or cold, and your vanilla. And then this is when you would add color, but I'm actually going to make 2 colors. So I'm going to wait till I have mine mixed and split it into bowls, and I'm going to make a couple different colors with mine. If you want to just make 1 color with yours, you can add it into your mixer after we get our icing made. And if you want to do more than 1 color, then you might want to grab a couple extra bowls from your kitchen and a spoon or spatulas to go with your bowls, so that you're going to be able to split up your icing and make some different colors, okay? I know sugar cookies can get really involved, or you can keep it really simple. So that's up to you today. If you want to keep it simple, you don't even have to color your icing. If you want to do a little more detail, you might want to do 2 colors or 1 color and leave some of it white. That's always an option too. So I'll leave that up to you on your end. What you would like to do in your kitchen. Some people really get into sugar cookies and they make like 10 colors, and that takes a really long time. So I definitely wouldn't suggest that today with doing class. I would, maybe 2 or 3 colors and keep it at that just for today with practicing. So I'm going to wait 2 minutes until my cookies come out. That'll allow everybody to I know some of you are probably ready. You probably already have your supplies, but that just gives everybody 2 extra minutes here to go ahead and finish up, get your cookies into the oven, get them baking, and we're going to move on to the icing. Yeah, everybody take a deep breath, Chef Ted said. Get something to drink, maybe a snack. Chef Ted said if you're signed up for class tonight, you'll need your energy because it'll be crazy. Man, those savory classes, I'm telling you. I love baking because it's so precise, and you just it's all measured, and yeah. All right, my oven is 20 seconds here. All right, let's see what we have here. All right, they're looking good. They're not quite. Okay, so Ted is going to bring the camera in close here. So you can see mine haven't really gotten any browning yet, but they're starting to get very, very tiny cracks around the outside edges. You can see them around the cookies. Okay, and when I press the middle of the cookie, it's not leaving the indentation of my finger. And so I'm going to carefully, mine are pretty soft, and carefully raise it. It has hardly any browning. I'm going to put mine in for 2 minutes, and then I'm going to call it done because they are baked at this point. But I'm going to do 2 more minutes just to make them a little sturdier because they're very delicate. They're very soft right now. But they are done at this point. So I'm suggested not over baking them too much, but I am going to make sure mine are firm enough so that when I pick it off the pan after it cools, I'm able to pick it up to glaze it because we're actually dipping to glaze today. I'm going to show you a really quick, easy method to glaze cookies. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the buttercream, and you'll probably see me pause and just go back to pull it out of the oven. And so you have your butter in your mixer. You're going to go ahead and put your mixer down, or you're going to start to mix it by hand to soften your butter. So you're going to mix, and mine's not going to take long because mine's already softened, but you're going to mix your butter until there's no lumps. Now, when you're using cold butter, that process involves mixing. You'd mix for 30 seconds, okay, on your mixer. This is if you're using a mixer. And then you'd go ahead and scrape it down. And then you'd mix another 30 seconds, and you'd scrape it down. And you would keep that process until the butter is completely smooth and there's no lumps. Cold butter can make lumpy icing, and so we certainly want your icing to be nice and smooth and creamy. And so doing a process of 30 seconds and scraping can achieve that faster. The reason I say only to mix it for 30 seconds is if you think about this for just a second, if we have butter in our mixer and we start mixing, and for those of you that have a mixer probably already know this, so the stuff in the middle will be mixing. The stuff on the outside stays kind of like attached to the bowl. It pushes some of it to the bowl. And so the stuff in the middle is just mixing. So if you're like, oh, my butter is really cold, I'm just going to walk away from it for a few minutes and let it mix, well, that stuff in the middle is getting really, really soft. And the stuff on the bowl is still the same temperature. And then after 3 or 4 minutes, when you stop and scrape it, you've got 2 completely different temperatures, and you try to blend them together, and they don't want to blend. And sometimes you can never get rid of the lumps at that point. So mixing for only 30 seconds and then scraping, 30 seconds and scraping, this is with cold butter, that's going to help you achieve a smooth butter, and it'll still be cold, but there won't be any lumps in it. All right, my cookies look good. I'm going to pull them out. Again, I have just the slightest amount of golden brown around the outside of it, okay? And if you're not seeing any golden brown, but your cookies are definitely firm to the touch, have those little tiny cracks around the outside edge, and then they have, I'll show you the browning on the bottom, they have the lightest golden brown on the bottom of the cookie, then you're done and you're ready to go, okay? So, Ted, can you see the cracks on the top of this cookie? You can see some tiny little ones around. So Chef Ted's going to bring mine over. So the oven I used today in our classroom, I mean, there's the slightest amount of gold in it, and you probably can't even, like this tray that Ted's on right now has less than even this tray over here. I got a tiny little bit around the edges. But you can see the tiny little cracks. These ice cream cones have even more little cracks. But then whenever you pick it up and you look at the bottom, it's going to have a golden brown to the bottom, and they're going to be firm. All right? So go ahead and enjoy one of those cookies once yours comes out. Nothing like a fresh sugar cookie right out of the oven. Once you get your butter softened, you're going to go ahead and add all of your powdered sugar at one time, which I know is always a little bit alarming to everyone, like we're adding all of this at one time. We sure are. And so if you're using parchment paper with the sifter like I am, you're going to gather the paper on one end, pinch it together hard so that there's no opening, and then leave the other end open, okay? And you're going to dump the sugar, all the sugar into the mixer, okay? And then you're going to go ahead and lower the mixer. And I like to add some of the water. So my suggestion, since we're not exactly sure how much water, and the reason we're not sure how much water we're adding today is because this moisture in the air that I talk about. That moisture that's in the air absorbs into our powdered sugar, and it makes it more moist or it makes it more dry. And today in Chattanooga, it's definitely, mine is more moist. So I would suggest only adding half of the water right now. So you're going to add 1 teaspoon of water. So let me do just 1 teaspoon. So I saw how much it stuck inside my bowl. That kind of like alarmed me to maybe be conservative with the water. And I'm locking my mixer down, and I'm starting on speed 1. As long as you start on speed 1, it's not going to fly out of your bowl. Now, if you're mixing this at home by hand, I'm going to show you the process of mixing it by hand when you're using powdered sugar is pressing hard, and stirring. You would press and stir. Now, obviously, you're going to need a bigger bowl than what I have right here. I'm just demonstrating, but you're going to use a series of pressing the butter into the sugar and stirring, pressing and stirring. And as you create friction and as you soften things, it'll come together. Now, my mixer, I want to show you here. I'm going to pull this just a little bit closer. It is still really dry and crumbly, okay? It doesn't look like icing at all right now. And some people get really alarmed. So you can see how dry it is. Chef Ted's bringing in another camera. So you are going to continue to mix until things start to come together. That's a lot of butter. And so if you're able to bump it up to speed 2, you'll bump it up to speed 2. But again, the most we're doing is 4th speed, actually, for the icing and the cookie dough today. 4th speed is the maximum speed on a lot of things whenever we're baking. And so mine is starting to come together as a dough. My sugar is absorbed at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it to 4th speed because it's certainly not smooth. So again, start out on 1st. As it starts to absorb, you might be able to bump it up to 2nd. Once it comes together as a sticky icing with no dry flour, you're going to switch it to 4th speed. You know, I still, when I'm looking down in my mixer right now, I'm still seeing tiny little lumps that have not completely mixed in yet, and that's okay, all right? As long as it's not butter. The idea is to have no butter lumps whenever we start adding our sugar. If we have butter lumps when we started adding our sugar, then we'll probably have lumps in our finished icing. So I'm going to stop. I mixed for, 30 seconds to a minute on 4th speed. I stop, and I'm going to scrape down the mixer, okay? Go ahead and get it scraped. And again, as long as the top half of the attachment is scraped down, you're probably going to be good. And I'm going to continue to mix because I still see lumps of sugar. Even though I sifted, it's going to lump a little bit in there, and you're going to need to give it time to mix. Now, this doesn't have flour in it, so we're not creating any gluten right now. So the more we mix, yes, it incorporates the ingredients, but it also adds air. So we want like a moderate amount of air, but not too much. If it's too fluffy and you're using a piping bag today, it'll make it really difficult to do that. And so you're going to mix it until it's nicely combined, but don't whip it to the point where it has so much air that it can be hard to work with. So again, I'm currently on speed 4. All right, so mine's starting to look smooth. What I'm doing is I'm looking down inside my mixer. I'm just looking at one of the edges where the paddle's coming around and hitting it. And you can see whether there's some lumps of sugar in there or not. And mine are getting very few. Now you see I haven't added my vanilla yet, and you might be doing a different flavor, but you definitely want to make sure there's no dry sugar when you add your vanilla. When you're making buttercream, if you add your vanilla with the powdered sugar when it's dry, it'll attach to the powdered sugar. And then once everything comes together, you know, especially when you're using vanilla, it'll leave brown specks in your icing because it's attached to pieces of sugar. But if you wait until it's become an icing like it has now, okay, and then add your vanilla, it's going to mix in evenly and completely. And you're not going to see, I mean, it's going to turn my icing a little bit of a different color because vanilla is brown. So it's going to be an off, like maybe a really light beige color, a little bit off-white. And I'm going to do one more scrape. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. I like to tilt it back, you've noticed, whenever I scrape. It does give you a little bit more space. And you're going to scrape the edges of the icing down. And then try to scrape the top half. And the stickier it gets, the more challenging it is. I tend to go in with my hands because my pastry chef at school was like, the best utensils attached to your arm all the time. And she was talking about our hands, and she taught us how to work with our hands, so we used the utensils very little. So again, I'm scraping with those 2 fingers that I mentioned earlier. They scrape your attachment really well. You can trace it out. And as long as your icing's kind of moved to the bottom, then you're good to go. And this is what I like to have my dry towel for. So if you're not using gloves, or if you know your glove is not dirty, you're just going to be using icing again, you can just wipe your hand off on your towel. Now, if you start licking your fingers, you may want to go wash your hands. I'll leave that up to you. You're at your house. So when you're in our classroom, that's my only rule about licking your fingers, is you have to wash your hands. So whatever your rules are at your house, you can follow those. All right, and I'm going to stop because I don't want to add too much air, but my vanilla extract has been completely combined, and I have a really nice, soft, spreadable icing at this point. And so it's a real nice, soft consistency. So you're going to finish mixing your icing. So some of you that are mixing it by hand, you may take a little bit longer. You're really going to have to use some elbow grease, but it's definitely doable. We didn't always have mixers, right? Everything was mixed by hand, so everything can definitely be mixed by hand. And I'm just scraping off my spatula, or my paddle attachment with my spatula. You know, I always see students trying to work around tools in the mixing bowl or in their bowls, and you know, it's always easier if you have that attachment out and you have all the icing scraped down to the middle, okay? And then you're going to be ready to go. And so hopefully your cookies are starting to come out of the oven. I'm going to move my mixer to the side. You're done with your mixer today after you get your icing mixed. So I'm going to get rid of my attachment there and a couple of other things on my table. And like I mentioned earlier, I was going to split it out and make a couple different colors just to add some interest. So I have 2 bowls here. Okay, so we have some questions in the Q&A that we're going to take care of, and then I'll get back to coloring the icing. Our powdered sugar and butter are not combining, and we've put the full amount of butter in. Oh, the full amount of water. Oh, should we add more water? So you've put the full amount of water in. Okay, so I would continue to mix. Are you mixing it with the mixer or by hand, Jennifer? So let us know if you're mixing by hand or using a mixer, and I'll be able to help you out probably a little bit more there. Stand mixer but on a KitchenAid. Okay, so you're going to continue to mix. It just needs to mix longer. So if you're able to increase the speed and it not come out of the mixer, then you're going to increase until it all comes together. It will look really crumbly at first and you'll be like, there's no way this is becoming an icing. But if we add too much water too early, it'll make your icing separate and it won't be the same. So go ahead and increase the speed a little bit if you're able to and let it continue to mix. And it should certainly come together. All right? Do we have any other questions that need to be answered right now, Chef Ted? Okay, I'm getting a no. So with my icing, okay, and don't feel behind. Just work at your own pace at your house, but definitely make sure you're catching all the learning. And so I'm going to leave some of my icing white, okay, in my bowl over here. In my bowl. Where's my bowl? Right there. And I'm going to put a little bit in 2 bowls and do 2 different colors here. So, and you can certainly just use spoons if you just have spoons. I'm going to do a little bit of pink and a little bit of yellow. And again, I'm using the Americolor. It's a gel paste coloring, but if you have your own coloring at home, you can go ahead and try that. I just wouldn't suggest a liquid coloring. It needs to be a thicker color. So I'm going to go ahead and get these colors stirred in. All right, so am I muted right now? Okay, Chef Ted is asking me a question over here. Someone has a much smaller amount of icing, and I don't think they picked up ingredients from me. I was just trying to remember by name. So basically, it was supposed to be 6 ounces of butter, which was a stick and a half, and 12 ounces of powdered sugar. That's the amount that I made. So I've got like a small dollop of icing in this bowl, a small dollop of icing in that bowl, and then a little bit bigger dollop left in this bowl. So I'm not saying I have a huge amount of icing, but it does end up being plenty for this recipe. So if you feel like you ended up with a really small batch of icing, you might want to double check the amounts of your ingredients and see if you made the right amount, okay? And then I also have another question. Kristen, my icing seems really thick and dense, not creamy or fluffy at all. Is that how it's supposed to be? It should be fluffy, so you can either achieve that by mixing it more, or you can go ahead and add that second teaspoon of water. Depending on where you're at, you might need that second teaspoon, and you'll continue to mix until it's nice and soft, okay? Okay, so Kelly, you're asking if this is the icing we are piping or the cookie on the cookie, piping on the cookie or spreading it on the cookie. And you'll be able to do either one at your house. So if you're not going to be piping today, then you're going to be spreading this on your cookies to decorate them. And if you're piping today, then I'm going to show you how to put it in bags and some basic piping skills, okay? And so you're going to make your colors. And then what I want you to do, after you have your icing made and your selected colors, if you're doing colors, you're going to cover your bowls with plastic wrap so it doesn't start to get a crust on it. And you're going to set your icing off to the side. And we're going to start getting the ingredients together for the glaze. So you're going to turn to the second page, and you are going to start gathering the ingredients for glaze. So I'm just going to set my items to the side. I'm going to get some plastic here and just make sure they're covered so my icing doesn't get crusty. All right, I hope you're doing good out there. I bet it smells good in your kitchen because it smells good. My cookies smell good. I guess I can turn my oven off too. I forget to do that sometimes. So my oven I just turned off because I am done baking cookies. And I'm covering even my white icing. I'm making sure everything is covered. And you can start to gather and get your ingredients ready for the glaze. Glaze is really easy. You've probably made this before. It's just basically powdered sugar and water. Some people use milk. I like to use the water because it doesn't perish as quickly as like an icing with milk does. And so I just use water, or if you're making like an orange glaze or a lemon glaze or a lime glaze, you could use citrus and use the juice from the fruit as your liquid or part of your liquid. You could add some zest to it. I'm just doing the basics today. So I'm going to be doing just powdered sugar and water, and I'm going to add a little extract. But you could add a little flavoring. You can add a little bit of coloring if you wanted to. I'm going to keep my glaze white, but if you wanted to glaze, color your glaze like a really pale yellow or orange or something like that, you could do that. So I'm going to measure out my powdered sugar. Powdered sugar is 6 ounces. So, like I said, it's nice to have a spoon nearby just to kind of add. Well, maybe. I dumped it on the scale, so that makes it a little more complicated. Keep in mind, that's a good example. Keep in mind, if you get ingredients on the base of the scale, it's weighing that too. So you need to make sure that it's nice and clean to get an accurate reading. So I've got my 6 ounces of powdered sugar. Okay. Put this away. We are done with powdered sugar now. And I got some sugar on my table. I'm just going to get that out of the way there. All right. So I've got my sugar, my water. It's going to be as needed, which I know complicates things. But what I would suggest is having, and you don't need quite this much water, but I have a container with water in it. And then have a teaspoon and a tablespoon nearby. And that's what we're going to use to measure. So you're also going to need a bowl with a spoon. Okay, so we're just gathering things right now. So 6 ounces of powdered sugar. If you're measuring, it's a cup and a half. And you need cold water nearby with a teaspoon and a tablespoon. And then if you're using coloring or extract, you will want to have that as well. And I'm going to do a little bit of almond this time around. Just a hint. Almond's that really nice familiar flavor that's in a lot of wedding cakes or birthday cakes whenever you order them from somewhere. When it's not vanilla, it's probably almond. And so it's a flavor that a lot of people are familiar with and is kind of like comforting and reminding them of something good. And so with our powdered sugar, I'm going to sift mine again. So if you have a sifter, you're welcome to do that. Go ahead and get it sifted and get it ready. Again, I'm bouncing it against my hand and getting it through the sifter. Right? And this time it's a little different. We're going to actually start with the powdered sugar in our bowl. I'm just going to pick this up and put it in my bowl. Now, I like to sift on parchment paper because it does keep it a little bit fluffier. If you sift into the bowl, it does kind of pack it together. And so that's why I'm always sifting on parchment and then moving it into the bowl. Now, as far as the water goes, before we add extract or coloring, we need to get this to an icing or a glaze consistency. So you're going to start with, actually, I don't want anyone to overdo it. So start with 2 teaspoons. Let's not use the tablespoon. Start with 2 teaspoons, and you're going to start to mix. So the reason I like to use a tablespoon or a teaspoon measure, it kind of holds me back so that I'm not adding too much water. A lot of times when you're making a glaze, you can easily add too much water, and then you literally do not have enough powdered sugar in your whole house to compensate for the amount of water that you've added, because it can be too much really quickly, okay? So I'm adding 1 teaspoon at a time to get the right consistency. My amount will definitely be different than your amount, but you can see I'm adding 1 at a time, and I'm stirring, and then I add another, and I stir. And so I'm not adding any extract at this point, okay? Do you see mine? Ted's coming in with the closer camera. You can see mine still has dryness around the outside edge. And at this point, it's getting a lot closer. So I'm going to add 1 more teaspoon. And it's, you know, it's thick. You want it to be thick because the thickness will help create more friction to get all the sugar absorbed and all the lumps mixed in. And then we can adjust from there. But you're not going to adjust until we've added the coloring and the extract. So we're going to go ahead, and now that mine's mixed together, okay, and it's not perfect, but it's mixed and all the sugar is wet, and it's still really thick, I'm going to go ahead and add my flavoring. With my almond extract, I would suggest like only maybe a 1/4 teaspoon in this amount. You can do it to taste, but just remember, it's just accenting your cookie. It's not supposed to be the main flavor. So everything's just supposed to like complement the flavor of the cookie. And so I'm going to get that mixed in. And again, if you were doing coloring, this is when you would put a dab of color in. And when we're using the coloring, if you're using the gel paste, typically it's, you know, very concentrated for this. So you're literally using the tip of a knife or a toothpick to add the color. Rather than squirting it in, it's going to be too much. All right, so my glaze is a pretty nice consistency. It's thick. It's a little bit too thick. So now that I've added my extract, I'm going to go back in with a little bit of water. So you can see it's definitely leveling out in the bottom of my bowl, but when I pull it up, it's still rather thick. We don't want it too thin. It needs to glaze the cookie, but if it's too thick, it'll have a really thick layer of icing on the cookie, and it'll be too much icing with the amount of cookie. And I know some people are like, what? I love icing. Just pile it on. But you know what? The icing's supposed to complement our cookie, not be the main show. So we need to keep that in mind, okay? Now, if you have sprinkles in your household right now, you're going to want to grab your sprinkles out, and you're going to want to have them nearby. My glaze looks pretty good, so I've thinned it down to the point where it flows nicely. It's still thick, but it's going to be able to glaze my cookie, okay? And I'm going to move a couple of these things so that you all are going to be able to see well. And you might want to keep your water nearby because this annoying thing happens. As we're glazing cookies, as we're working with the glaze, the water is evaporating. Even though we have moisture in the air, the water will start to evaporate, and our glaze will start to get really thick. And that's only because some of the water has evaporated, and we literally will have to compensate with like a 1/2 teaspoon or a 1/4 teaspoon of water to bring it back to the right consistency. So it's just something that'll happen typically no matter what. So I've got my sprinkles here that I'm bringing over. I've got a few different ones. And I just want to have them close by when I start the glazing. I'm done with my parchment paper that I'm sifting on. And I'm going to bring a tray, my first tray of cookies over, okay? And mine are cool. You want to make sure yours aren't warm because it'll just melt the icing off. Even though we're glazing and we want it to be thin, it'll just melt it off. So you do want them to be cool. So I'm just kind of making sure they're room temperature. And I'm going to ask Chef Ted to come over so that he can do a close-up view of this. And should we make it their main screen or? Okay, yeah, we're going to make it your main screen so that you can see a closer view. And so the icing will also want to get a crust on it when it sits. So you might just have to give it a little stir every once in a while and keep your spoon off to the side. But what you're going to do is, and this is the quick glaze method. This is not flooding that you might have heard talked about. So you take your cookie, turn it upside down, and you're going to take the edges of your hand and grab your cookie, and you're going to dip into the icing, just the top of your cookie, not the whole thing, not down the edges. So your fingertips should get very little on it. Dip, shake. I like to take one finger and lightly scrape the excess off and then you turn it over, okay? So it's going to have, you might see the cookie through it, and that's okay. That's good, okay? But what's happening right now is we're making the canvas to put, if we're piping, to put piped icing on. So, you know, if you've ever tried to pipe icing on top of a cookie, sometimes it won't stick because we haven't created this nice canvas to glue it to. And so what happens, and you can see my cookies dripping a little bit, and I'm kind of cleaning that off the edge. If we put that icing on there first, our buttercream that we pipe on is going to stay. But also, if you have someone that doesn't like a lot of icing, you know, this is a really cool way to go, because once you glaze the cookie, you can literally just go on with sprinkles and call it done if you wanted to. And that's a cookie, okay? And that's a decorated, finished cookie. But you do need to put those sprinkles on right after you glaze, because as soon as it sits for just a couple minutes, it will start to harden, okay? So I suggest doing some of your cookies with glaze and sprinkles. If you're doing sprinkles, do some of your cookies with maybe no glaze on them, because if you're not using piping bags, you could just spread it right on top of a cookie with no glaze if you wanted to. So kind of do a variety of all. So maybe some with no glaze, some with glaze and no sprinkles, and some with glaze and sprinkles, okay? So I'm just going to go through the process again with you. And so you're taking your cookie, all right? You're turning it over. You're going to hold the edges of the cookie with your fingertips. You're going to dip into your icing, pick it up, shake it off really good, because the more icing you have on there, the more it's going to drip down the sides. Take one finger and just graze the top, okay? And I kind of clean the edges, and it's good to go, okay? People love learning this technique in my class because, you know, flooding cookies, if you're familiar with cookies and you've seen some flooding done, it takes a really long time. So basically with the flooding, you use a royal icing, you outline the cookie, and then you make the glaze and you flood it. And there's all these different stages. You have to let it dry in between each stage. And it can take a really long time. So this glazing method is really fast, but it does make your cookies look really nice. And then if you do pipe your icing on top, it does stay on the cookie. And so it's just a really simple, fast way to finish cookies, and you wouldn't even have to make buttercream icing. You literally could do cookies, glaze, and sprinkles, and your kids would be super happy, and it would be kind of a fast thing to have ready, especially if you made your cookie dough the day before and you already had it in your refrigerator. All right, again, my dry towel is for my sticky hands, so I don't worry about getting food on it. Okay, and so I'm going to let you glaze, and don't forget to put sprinkles on them if you want sprinkles. Do it before the glaze hardens. I did, yeah. My extract that I added to my glaze ended up being a 1/4 teaspoon. And you can taste it. Make sure you can taste it. I can smell it really good. I know how strong my extracts are. So, you know, I just wanted it to be a little hint. I didn't want the whole thing to taste like almond. So it's just a little bit of, ooh, what is that? You know, when someone eats my cookie. Like, that tasted really nice. All right, I hope you're having fun out there. Pastry can be super serious. I get super focused, so I hope you're having a nice time. And this is the exciting part, when you actually get to start to like glaze and decorate and do different things on your cookies. So I'm going to get my other pan and glaze a few of those as well. Maybe leave a couple that aren't glazed so I can demonstrate some spreading. And you'll just, you know, a butter knife works great for that, so you can use a butter knife for that. I hope you're having fun with your glaze. It does get a little messy, a little sticky on your fingers. That's okay. All right. Maybe one more. You know, if you decide like, hey, I really like this glazing, and you glaze half of yours, and you're like, I'm going to put a little dab of color in the rest, and do the other half another color, you know, that's definitely an option as well. Man, it smells good. I can smell the sugar cookie with the almond. Can you smell it over there? Yeah. All right. Some chocolate sprinkles on top of my ice cream cone there. All right. So I know we're at like a quarter after right now, quarter after 12. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to, and you guys, you know, you can spend more time decorating whenever you want, or you can keep doing what you're doing and watch. But I'm going to go ahead and get my other icing here and get some bags ready to show you all, because I know, you know, not all of you may have bags at home, but you might be interested in learning. So I'm just going to see if I have a pair of scissors that's going to function. I always say that all my scissors are safety scissors because they don't really cut, and so they're kind of safe, I guess. They always say a dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp knife, though. Okay, we have some Q&As. Okay. All right. So, Faye, can you... Oh, how do you save the glaze? Okay, so saving the glaze, that's a very good question. You would not want to put it in your refrigerator, and that's the reason I like to use the water. You can just cover the bowl, leave it at room temperature, but make sure you use it within 5 days, okay? And Linda, you have a question too. Can you spoon on the glaze again so I can see the consistency? So spoon, I think spoon up the glaze. Okay, so it's definitely going to coat the cookie, but it's on the thinner side. So, you know, if you're not sure, what you can do is you can glaze the cookie and see how it does for you. You know, the glaze should be thin enough that you can actually like see some of the cookie through the glaze. So I can see like yellowish patches from the actual cookie through the glaze on my cookie. If it's too thick, it'll just look all white and you won't see any of the cookie. If it's too thin, it'll just run off. So, you know, if it's too thin, you can adjust with more powdered sugar, just a tiny bit. And so you can kind of test your glaze that way. There's many times that I'll start glazing and I'm like, oh, this is not as thin as I thought it was. And I'll add just a tiny bit more water to it. All right, so I have some plastic piping bags here and I'm going to show you. So if you got ingredients from us, I had some new tips that were star tips that looked just like this. And so I went ahead and gave you one of those in your bag, and that's for you to keep along with that cookie cutter. And I'm just going to cut a little bit off the end here. And I'm going to insert this into my bag. And I actually have a lot of glaze on my gloves, so I'm going to take those off so that I don't end up with all this sticky icing on the outside of my bags. I'm just going to get some new gloves. If you have icing on your hands before you start filling your bags, you'll want to wash your hands. And then this is a very thick icing that we're working with, so all you need to do is fold the bag back. So if you want to bring me as the full screen, fold the bag back, roll it down, and the idea is that the top of your bag is now down here where your tip is. And you know, if you have bags and no tips, use them just like that, and you can cut a little hole in the end, and you can do some piping, okay? And then you're going to go ahead. I'm going to put my pink icing in here, all right? I'm putting my pink icing. So what you can do is hold your ice cream cone in your non-dominant hand. So I'm using my left hand, and I'm scooping with my right hand. If you have a sous chef or friends with you, they can hold the bag with 2 hands. And you can fill the whole thing, but a lot of times we're alone when we're baking, so hold it in one hand, scoop with the other. And then pull the bag all the way up, and you can push the icing, start to push the icing down, okay? I'm also gonna do another bag, because, I mean, and it's okay, if you have no bags, don't feel like you're missing out. I wanna teach you some things. So this might give you, you know, some interest to go get a bag. But, you know, there's different types of tips. So I used a bigger tip here, and that tip does not need a coupler. And then I'm going to use some smaller tips that require a coupler. A coupler is this little plastic tip that goes inside the bag, and then it comes with a ring, and the ring goes on the outside. So, and then you'll have a tip that gets placed on top of that coupler, and then it goes like that. But first, we need to put the bottom piece inside the bag. So I've cut some, area off my bag. You can always cut more, but you can never glue it back. So I always tell everybody, be conservative, cut a little bit, test out your tip inside. If you need to cut more, you can. But the idea when you're cutting this is to make sure the plastic of your bag is somewhere up here. If it gets down here where the threads are, it can cause you some problems. It can leak out. So you want it above the threads, but not past the top here. And then I'm going to go ahead. I'm using, this is a cool little, let me see. How can they see this? On my close-up. All right, that's a petal tip. I just wanted to show you some different things. They make all different sizes of the petal tips, and every brand is going to be a different size. So all of my tips are either a Tico brand or a Wilton. So my star tip is a Tico, and it was number 822. And then this little petal tip that I'm using is actually Wilton, and it's a 103. So I know some people are really interested out there in what we're using. And then you're going to roll the bag down again. Okay, so this is the basics of filling a bag. You always roll it down halfway. And I'm going to use my yellow for this one. And this is only so I can show you a couple different techniques. And I'm going to mix my icing a little bit again, just to make sure it's all the same consistency. And I'm going to scoop up all my icing and put it into my bag. All right. I'm going to pull my bag back up. Go ahead and push my icing down. And so I've got my yellow and my pink. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a third bag. And that's up to you all what you're doing at your house. Again, this is, just to add to your learning. My third bag is also going to have the coupler in it. Okay. And so I'm going to cut the other bag, and it's going to be the white icing that I saved. So let me show you this. I didn't go in full detail here, but you're going to put the coupler down inside the bag. I showed you where to have it cut at, so it needs to be above the threads. Do you want to put me on full screen again? So it needs to be above the threads, and then you place the tip on there, and then the coupler ring. And this can be kind of hard, but you screw it down. Make sure everything is fitting tightly together. All right? What's cool about this, using the couplers, is you can switch out tips in between and use a bunch of different tips with the same color of icing. Okay? But some of the smaller tips, they don't sell them in larger tips, so you have to use the coupler with them to get the size that you want. So you may not use the option of switching out, but it's there if you need it. If you're decorating a birthday cake and you're doing a border with one tip and you want to write a name with another, you can just switch it out with a smaller and write on the cake then, or do some smaller decoration. So I'm putting all my white icing in here. Pushing it down as well. Okay. I'm going to put this off to the side. So if you're doing the same type of thing I'm doing right now, you're going to end up with probably some extra dishes today. And so now at this point, I'm going to show you some things with piping. And so Chef Ted, if you want to bring the close-up camera over for a little while. And again, if you're not right with me, I want you to learn some extra things. So you can certainly pipe on your cookies. Oh, and I'm going to show you how to spread before we start doing this. So some of you that are spreading can do that. I'm just going to grab a butter knife like you would have at home, okay? And if you're going to be spreading a cookie, and I put all my icing in bags. So what I'm going to do is, and I think Chef Ted's answering some questions over there, but I'm going to show you right here. If you're going to ice with a knife on the cookie, just pretend that was a blob that I sat on there. So I took my knife and I put a blob on the cookie. Then you're going to take and you're going to just carefully spread it around with the tip of your knife to spread it on your cookies. And then again, the buttercream will also get a crust on it. So what you'd want to do is you want to definitely make sure you put the sprinkles on right away if you're adding sprinkles. Okay? Something else that's cool, if you put your icing on with the knife, and Chef Ted is coming over now, if you put the icing on with the knife and just kind of carefully, get it spread around, you saw that I rotated the cookie to get it close to the edge. Then what you can do, if you're like, well, it kind of looks messy, you can make it messy on purpose. You can kind of start in one corner and go back and forth and do little messy lines, but it makes it look like it was done on purpose, okay? And so if you're spreading it on, you can still use some technique to make it look a little bit neater, okay? And should we shut one of the lights off with the glare? Okay. Okay, your camera's going to go for a quick second. And what we're doing is we're shutting we have a lot of lighting in here. And so for closer things, when there's a glare, we need to shut one of the lights off. So we're going to go ahead and see if you can get a better view of that. Yeah. So I took the knife and at the corner, I just spread back and forth and brought it across the cookie to give it a little bit of a pattern. And then if you're not using, a tip, you can still make your cookies look really nice. And then, like I said, if you're going to do sprinkles, you would need to do that quickly because it's going to start to get a crust and they're not going to stick. So if you try to put your sprinkles on and they just roll off, you know that it's already created a crust and you're not going to be able to put your sprinkles on, okay? So that's spreading with the knife. And then, Chef Ted, you can stay here. I'm going to go ahead and show some other details. So this is a cookie that I glazed. And again, I'm using the star tip, and I mentioned that this was the Atico, and I think I said it was 822. Yes, it's 822. So a really simple, quick method with a cookie that you can use is you can turn your pastry bag straight up and down. So it's completely straight, and I'm going to start squeezing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around in circles, okay? So I'm going to start at the middle. I'm squeezing, and I'm going to start a circle. And then I'm going to do another circle, and then I'm going to do another circle. And you can literally ice your whole cookie this way. I think I'm going to stop there. That looks kind of nice with some glaze still showing. And you can ice it, and that looks kind of like a rose, but you can do the whole top of your cookie in that circular motion with your star tip. And something else with your tips, if it gets a little messy on the edges, you might want to go ahead and wipe it off, because it will come out of the tip messy if there's icing globbed on the outside of it at all. Okay, so let me show you that one more time. Let's see, what do we want to use? Maybe I'll use this one here. And so you're squeezing in the middle of the cookie. And so my hand is on the top of my bag, and I'm creating a clamp with my thumb and pointer finger, and I'm making sure it's tight. So very taut, twisted, and I'm squeezing with my hand, and I'm just using my other hand as a guide, and not only so I can see, but if I squeeze here, it makes it come out way too fast. So I need one hand squeezing, and so I'm going to squeeze, I'm going to keep squeezing, and I'm going to be slowly moving in a circle, squeeze, 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 and just kind of keep going, and you can do kind of like a rose in the middle of your cookie. All right. When I tell everyone that's just starting to decorate cookies, that you certainly want to make sure that you're piping, it's almost like you're piping in slow motion, which can seem really weird, but people think if they go faster, it'll turn out better. But it's actually the reverse. If you go really slow, like literally like you're making a slow motion video, like slow, and really pretending to be slow, then you'll actually get better results than going fast. And then as you learn techniques, you can increase your speed. But you're going to want to go really slow to get good results. Now, this is the tip that I mentioned that's Wilton. It's a 103, and it's called a petal tip. And so it looks like a really skinny teardrop is what it is. And to use this tip, you put the skinny end up. I know lots of people have kits of tips at home, and there's some that you've never used. So this one might be one of those that you've never used before. But what you can do is you can angle this and start to pipe, and I do a little loop. So I pipe out and bring it back, pipe out and bring it back, and see how it starts to do petals of a flower. So I have my skinny end up, I have my bag at a 45-degree angle this time, and I'm looping out and I'm bringing it to the center. And this is just to show you some different things that you can do with your cookies, okay? So that's a really small flower in the middle. If you wanted to do a larger flower in the middle, let me grab another cookie here. You would start on the outside and work your way in. So the opposite of what we did with the pink icing. So what you would do, and this is a square cookie, so yeah, I'll try to do round here, but you're going to loop out, and so you start out further, and it's like you're making a wreath on the outside. All right, I'm going to stop and turn my cookie. And again, this all takes practice. So don't feel like, oh, you know, the first time we try to do something, we hardly ever get it the very first time. So don't get discouraged. You know, just start practicing. And, you know, flowers are natural, so even, like mine's not even either, and it doesn't need to be. But you can do a wreath around the outside, and then you can go ahead and do another layer on the inside, and it looks like this little creative little flower. And if you made green icing, you can go back and do a stem if you wanted to. I can go ahead and I can take maybe some brown sprinkles and do, you know, a little bit to the center of my cookie. And so that's you know, it may seem difficult at first because you haven't practiced it, but that's a really simple, fast way to do icing just on cookies, you know, using the star tip and also using this little petal tip. And, you know, play with the petal tip a little bit. Turn it at different angles. Practice. You could practice, you know, on parchment paper or on the table, and then scoop it back up and use the icing. So if you're not ready to practice on your cookie, you know, maybe bring it to the table or the countertop and be like, well, let me get a feel for this. You know, if I turn it this way, what does it do? If I turn it this way, and get a feel for how it needs to be in your hand, and then you can go to the cookie and play with it. And remember just to pause, rotate your cookie, because your arm is not going to be able to go the whole way around and it actually look the same, okay? And then for this one, I'm going to show you one more thing. Okay, and I know, you know, you all might not be at the same pace because I'm just demonstrating as you all are doing stuff right now, but cookies are nice to just kind of like outline sometimes. So I'm going to show you, I'm using a plain tip, and it is a number 3 Wilton tip, okay? So it's a very small round tip, and with this much icing, sometimes it can be hard to pipe. So what I always tell people, and I tell this to my younger students in class, my right hand's on the top. You can actually trade hands, put it in your left hand, take the icing, bunch it together in the middle, and do a twist in the middle, and make this mini bag. So if you're having trouble piping your icing, or if you're using a very small tip like I am, then make this little mini bag, hold the top with your other hand, and then your other hand will have something to do. It'll stay out of the way. And you're going to twist and make this section really tight, and you can squeeze right here. So for little hands, this is a great way to go so that they can practice piping, and they'll be able to actually get it out of the bag. And so, you know, and again, this all takes practice, but you can take and you can touch down your tip on the cookie and then raise it up. And if you want to trace your cookie, you can go around and you can trace and make a border. And so this is a nice way to start decorating a cookie, is actually like creating the border of the cookie and then decorating it is one way to go. And you know, that one was one that I didn't have glaze, so I might choose to do that border and then put a little yellow flower in the middle, little sprinkles, and call it done, okay? You know, if you have these ones that are glazed, you can certainly, you know, trace, and I don't know how well you can see the white on the white, but you can go ahead and you can kind of outline the cookie. It makes it look how much cleaner that makes the cookie look already. And then you can go ahead and decorate the middle, or like if you wanted to pipe someone's name, you could pipe someone's name. Or here, I'll do Eva. Eva is short. That's one of my daughters. So I could do E. And again, what you're doing with this, and it's going to take some practice, but I'm touching down to attach, and then I lift slightly. And every time I move with it, I have to dab down just a little. But again, you know, as you're doing this, do it in slow motion, and that's going to help you become a little bit better with piping. But I am holding it straight up and down. Another suggestion is rather than moving your arms, move your body. So what I do is I have my bag. I could work with you on piping things for 3 hours, and we're not going to do that. So you can attach your elbows to your side, and you can just move your body to move the bag, and you're going to get, we call it the flow, you're going to get a steadier flow coming out of your bag. So this kind of shows you some basic tips on doing things with your icing, and you can certainly practice these. Everything takes practice, especially in pastry. We look at a picture, we think it's going to turn out exactly the same the first time we do it, and that hardly ever happens. So don't be discouraged. We definitely need practice. I've been doing pastry for a little over 20 years. So a lot of my students will say, you make it look so easy. And, showing the techniques, yes, it's not going to turn out the same when you do it, but as you practice, you're going to be able to get the same results as well. So I used the star tip and made this rose pattern on my cookie. I also used a little petal tip and made some little petals. And then I did just glazing with sprinkles on the top, okay? And I did glazing with a border, and then it had my little Eva's name on there. So this just gives you some ideas of what you can do with your cookies to decorate, and you choose what works best for your house. I have people that don't like a lot of icing, so a really thin glaze is a fun way to be able to put sprinkles on, but not go into too much icing with their cookie. So what we're going to do from here is, as you're working on your cookies and having fun, because this is the fun part, so don't get stressed. Make it fun, especially if you have littles at your house. It's not going to be neat. It's not going to be clean. Just let them have fun, and that's good. They just have to get their hands in it, and that's great practice for them. So we're going to answer some questions. So if you need to put any questions up in the Q&A, you can do that. Also, if you want to raise your hand, we would love to see your cookies. And we're going to do a little bit of hand raising, and then I know we're a little bit over on time, but in 5 minutes, I'm going to do final thank you for coming to class, a few more details for you, and then anyone that wants to sign out at that point, you can, but I'd like you to hold on for at least 5 more minutes. And then after that, we're going to stay up on the screen, and we're going to allow people to show off their work and to raise their hand, and we'll still be here with you for several minutes after that. So if anyone would like to raise your hand, go ahead and do so. Until then, I will continue to decorate some cookies here while you're decorating yours. So Chef Ted, if you just want to kind of let me know when anyone raises their hand. Okay. So don't get overwhelmed. I just wanted to show you lots of different possibilities for your cookies. Chef Ted, do you want a cookie? Yeah? Come pick one out. You can have any, do you want glaze, icing? I know I usually share my cookies with all of you, so I'm sorry I can't do that. I hope to be able to do that again soon. So Chef Ted has been getting lots of sweets. He takes them and he shares them with his neighbors, so I'm sure his neighbors are starting to love him, right? Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Okay. I have, it's like, I'm using the pedal tip. The skinny part is at the top. And I'm just going to show you on a cookie that's not glazed because I don't have really one that's glazed that would be appropriate for this. But you're going to turn your bag at a 45-degree angle with the skinny part up. So the skinny part's raised up. You're going to squeeze and come up. So basically you go up and down, squeezing up and down, up and down. So I squeeze, come up, down, stop squeezing. Squeeze, up and down, and stop squeezing. And so I don't go around a curve. The tip automatically makes that curve at the top for me. I'm literally going straight up and straight down as I'm moving around the cookie. Okay? So I hope that helps you. And then you can go around and do another layer in the middle, maybe a little bit smaller or a little shorter, and you can do another layer on your cookie. You could even go out even further and do 3 layers on your cookie. And then it looks kind of cute, with a flower if you put another color in the middle of it and give it that pop in the middle. That always looks pretty. I might even do like have a little round sprinkle there. Okay. So Chelsea, I hope that helped. Okay, that helps. Awesome. Okay. All right. We still have like about 10 people that are with us. If anyone wants to all right. I think everyone is good. Thanks again for joining my class today.